You mentioned Lula's coalition, and you mentioned his arrangement with budgetary grants. So that, for me, is a good segue for us to bring Cedê into the conversation. Cedê Silva, who is our Brasília correspondent. And Cedê, I want to start the conversation with you by talking about the fact that Lula was elected under this huge coalition, not a big tent, but a huge tent. And now we are seeing, after 100 days, that building a support base in Congress has been much harder than anticipated. So what you have seen now, what is the government's footing in the legislature? Because the agenda is quite ambitious, and it will need Congress to play ball with the government. So what's the state of things in Brasília, just a few kilometers from where you are? You're on mute.
I agree with Bruna that the Lula administration has lost some opportunities on these 100 days and could do more because, in my understanding, there have been a lot of small good news for Lula and Lula's coalition, not as much because of the strength of the government, but because of the decisions by the opposition. I would highlight 5 of them recently, which are very good news for Lula. First, the mixed joint congressional committees are back this week after House Speaker Arthur Lira essentially played a game of chicken, but he blinked first, and the committees are back. We do not know yet if they're going to be back on the old format that gives the Senate and the House equal power, which is the format that House Speaker Arthur Lira wants to change, but they're going to be back regardless, and the senators are much ready to do their work on these committees.
By the way, just for a piece of context, these committees are responsible for analyzing provisional decrees issued by the president, which is a way of the president to enact legislation and enact legislation that is enforced immediately, but has to be passed within 120 days. Otherwise, it expires. And that includes measures, even like the very structure of the government is approved through a provisional decree. So if that game of chicken was still going on, we could see the very structure of the government be at least temporarily dissolved.
Precisely, and that also goes for Lula's provisional measures on important programs such as Bolsa Família, the program with cash stipends for the poorest Brazilians, and also Minha Casa Minha Vida, which is Lula's habitation program, Lula's program to build houses. They're all in provisional measures, which are due to expire very soon. And House Speaker Arthur Lira was playing a chicken game, basically not installing those committees and letting those provisional measures expire. But they're back, and they're back this week, and this is good news for the Lula administration. Second, the Joint Select Committee on the January 8 riots was not yet created. Much like in the United States, there is a revisionist movement by the far right to gaslight what happened and to blame the Lula administration solely and infiltrated leftists, which are not existent, and to greenlight what happened about the January 8 riots. And despite the opposition's efforts, this committee has not been installed yet. The third thing is the opposition has, as I predicted, behaving mostly about culture wars and talking points. Recently, they held this public hearing with Justice Minister Flávio Dino, and nobody knows exactly what Dino spoke about, because everyone that heard about this public hearing was talking about Congressman Nicolas Ferreira and André Janones talking back and forth and exchanging expletives and exchanging curse words. And nobody knows exactly, nobody paid attention to the minister who was supposedly going to be grilled. The fourth thing is Senator Flávio Bolsonaro, which is the eldest son of former President Jair Bolsonaro, has openly talked about his leaning towards approving the name of lawyer Cristiano Zanin, who will likely be Lula's next appointment to the Supreme Court. And finally, Bolsonaro's return to Brazil, which was a very, very hyped event, much highly anticipated by his Liberal Party, with a lot of press and a lot of talk about his going back from the United States, was a major flop. It was a flop. It was attended by a few dozen people. And Minister Alexandre Padilha, who is the minister of the Lula administration in charge of relations with Congress, even said so, using the English word flop. So there has been a lot of recent good news for the Lula administration, not because of the strength of the government, but because of the weakness of the opposition.
So let's talk about also what the challenges that the government still is going to face, because we have main agenda points such as a tax reform, such as the fiscal framework that Finance Minister Fernando Haddad presented a few weeks ago, last week, sorry, with a plan to curb, to prevent public spending from ballooning. These all require Congress approval. The fiscal framework, just simple majority, but the tax reform, constitutional majority of 6% and 2 rounds of voting in each congressional chamber. So those are a lot of votes, and Bruno alluded to how Lula plans to whip these votes. In your opinion, Cedê, what are the main hurdles this legislature could pose to the administration? Because I think one of the key differences between Lula 1 and Lula 2, as opposed to Lula 3 now, is the fact that now we have a far right that is very well organized. And even if, like you said, they stay blocked on cultural war themes, they still manage to do a lot of noise and to try and block some of the government's initiatives in Congress, right?
Yes, but I still think that on those cases, the main challenge for the Lula administration to get those votes in Congress is to actually present those bills in Congress in the first place, which the Lula administration has so far not done. Our foreign audience, probably people with business in Brazil, are mostly interested with the big 2 things, which are the new fiscal framework and the tax reform proposal. The fiscal framework was not yet formally presented to Congress. We do not have the text, the actual text of this new fiscal framework. Because of this, it still does not have a rapporteur in the House, and so the discussion simply cannot proceed, because in 100 days, the Lula administration has not actually submitted to Congress this fiscal framework, so it's only up to the Lula administration to make this walk forward. The same thing with the tax reform proposal. There is a proposal that has been discussed during the Bolsonaro administration, and the Lula administration is trying to recycle this proposal, but they are doing this with an informal working group as opposed to a committee. And the difference is, in a working group, you can appoint however you want, and in a formal committee, the parties, the composition of the parties and of the caucuses must follow proportionally according to their representation in the whole of the House. And since the tax reform is being discussed in this informal working group, the strength of the Lula administration has not been tested, because it is being done in an informal working group that was appointed, and with a heavy representation from lawmakers of the state of Amazonas, which are interested in keeping the tax-free zone there in Manaus, the capital of Amazonas. The other 3 things that the Lula administration has promised but not yet delivered, not even to Congress, are the proposal to tax and regulate sports betting platforms. Justice Minister Flávio Dino promised a so-called anti-coup package with measures to avoid something similar to January 8 again. And also, the Lula administration has been promising for the last 3 months regulation of the so-called anti-fake news department of the Attorney General's office, of the AGU. All these 5 things: fiscal framework, tax reform, a proposal to tax sports betting, the anti-coup package, and the regulation of the anti-fake news department, they have not yet been delivered. And they have not been submitted to Congress, or in the case of regulation of fake news, not published in the official gazette. And it's just a Lula decision, a Lula administration decision, not to submit those things. So the opposition has not yet had the opportunity, Gustavo, to actually oppose something, because the Lula administration has not submitted it to Congress. And as I've said, the Lula administration is missing an opportunity because most of the far right and most of these people who are still allied to Bolsonaro in Congress, they're basically concerned with transphobic fantasies and cultural wars agendas. And you have only a few lawmakers who are concerned with serious things. For example, Senator Rogério Marinho, who is keeping an eye on Lula's revision to the sanitation framework. But these are few and far between. And so the Lula administration has not yet submitted to Congress what it has been promising to do.
And the problem is, like you said, it's been 100 days and we still don't know how strong the government's footing is in Congress.
We'd like to introduce you to our latest release, our exclusive report on the first 100 days of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's third term as Brazilian president. Lula's 100 Days, Myriad Challenges and Unforced Errors is a valuable strategic tool that brings you in-depth analysis from our experts on the most important issues from the beginning of Lula's administration. In this exclusive report, you'll find insights and analysis on the government's support base in Congress, Brazil's return to foreign policy, fiscal, economic and environmental challenges, as well as how the administration is tackling social media regulation and planning to fight hunger. Don't miss this opportunity and use the coupon to get a 20% discount on the report. Enjoy your read.